Since you're familiar with basic painting techniques now, I'm not going to discuss how to do the pattern at this point. You're fairly fluent in watercolor technique, and I don't think this is going to pose any particular problem. I may go back to it a little bit later, but what I want to concentrate this morning on is the figure. The figure that you see here is from a Botticelli fresco, an Italian Renaissance artist whose work can be seen in the Sistine Chapel. So let's begin. I'm going to take my brown matter, which I have here, my palette, wet it up, and I like to get a little bit of yellow added to that. It's not bad. Maybe a little bit more. Good. I'm going to do a general wash with this light brown that I just mixed. What I do is I look at the lightest value in my subject, and unfortunately you can't see that. That's up on my monitor that I'm looking at, but I would imagine you're looking at yours. So I'm going to take my brown that I just mixed, since it's the common denominator throughout this entire image, and do a general wash. I want to kill the white. I want to establish a tone using this brown, this golden brown that I mixed up. Now this isn't intended to be a lesson in how to paint portraits, but I'm showing you a basic way that artists do begin portraits. And what they'll often do, Rembrandt actually did this, is he created a brownish, a burnt sienna type underpainting, and then he worked into it gradually and built into it until it becomes the realistic image that we're familiar with his art. I have to let this wash dry before I can go any further. Having just dried it with the hairdryer, I'm ready to continue to work into it. So what I like to do is now analyze the darker patterns that I see on the face, and introduce them to the wash, my first wash of color. And up around the forehead, it's fairly light value up there. So what I did is I wet that with my brush there. And now I'm going to go back into my brown, the same brown that I used for the first initial wash. And I'm going to lay it in, a little too dark. Get that paint off the brush. And now I'm going to begin to work it in. I kind of just I'm shading the areas that I see in shade in my image that's on my monitor. Good. Highlight there, and it's a shade there. The result, when I'm finished, will be a very washy watercolor effect. Sketchy in quality. See, it's a little bit of a shade there, too, where the arm is. A bit too strong, but we can correct that. I could even begin to work in some of the texturing of the hair at this stage, which would not be a bad idea. So see, I wet a bundle of the hair See how the hair forms clumps? So there's a clump there, and then there's another clump here, which I hesitate to do because I could run into the body, but yeah, I won't worry about it. Now, using a bit of the technique that you used in class, I wet that. I could put that, apply the color to the wet area, and let it modulate on its own from a darker concentration of the color to a lighter concentration on the other side. I like that. I always like to have a modulation from light to dark, or in this case from dark to light. I'm going to take a little of this brown color and into it add a slight touch of Antwerp blue. I think that'll allow me to get a nice grayed brown that I could use and paint into this, well, I should say flow into this, to suggest more of a shadow color. That's nice. That's working well. Yeah. The face more or less dried on its own. I could hit that a little bit with the hairdryer. So I'm going to take a little bit of this brown that I just mixed and apply another wash. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at where the shadows are, and I'm simply laying them in. I'm not concentrating on detail. I'm concentrating on blocking in basic shapes. Okay, I want to dampen this. What I want to have happen is I want the brown with a little bit of this blue added. Still using this mixture right here. I want to create a shadow. Her back seems to be in a shadow. Yeah, good. Then no more paint, just water. Essentially, the technique is laying in veils of color on top of previously applied veils of color to gradually create the effect of volume, of form, by modulating my colors from light to dark. Actually, let me wet that and introduce a little bit of the darker brown right under here. This part of the body in the actual fresco goes into a shade, so that works well. And I'm gonna bring up a little bit of a dark tone in here too. Here, let's dampen this. Now notice I'm only working with my browns right now. This I would consider this to be a brown underpainting. Underpainting meaning the first layers of paint applied to the painting with the intention of working into those layers with other colors as the image develops. I continue to add a little bit of either ultramarine or cobalt blue to my brown matter to create the shade color. Actually, that reproduction is very yellowish. I think the colors might be off. Okay, we'll let that dry. Having applied 2 or 3 layers of color, or I should say 2 or 3 washes of color, I'm going to continue to articulate the surface, define the surface with more thin washes. You see the nose area, there's a shadow that comes down right about there. I need to get that in. So, I mix a little of that brown and wash in the shadow that I see right about there. And the tip of the nose. And then where the nostril forms, it gets a little darker there. And I like the way the brown kind of fades out. The tone integrates with the rest of the face. Good. I'm going to go right to my cobalt in this case and add a bit of that shade under the chin. If you approach this as light veils of color, you really can't go wrong. Yeah, a nice little bit of tone there. Good. We have a little bit of tone over here. Darker tone. And I'm going to use this cobalt blue that I have. It always seems to be very useful for shadow color. Cobalt blue, shadow color, works well. I'm going to wash that cobalt blue into the rest of the body now. And I'm going to carry it around to under the arm right over here. A little bit of it comes up right about here. Good. What I'm trying to do, what I'm doing is I'm analyzing the image that I'm looking at in terms of its shadows. And then I sort of paint those shadows in wherever I see them. When you do this, don't worry about detail. I will eventually work and indicate like a little bit of a line for the eyebrow and a little bit of a tone, brownish red for the lip. But there is no detail in the image that I'm copying from, so there's no need to work detail in here. Let's wash in some more brown in the hair to continue to develop the hair. Good. Once again, I'm taking that cobalt blue and I'm mixing it with my brown to get a shade. And I will apply the shade to the hair right about there, to the shadow that I see in the photo. Once again, I dried it with the hairdryer, and I'm going to continue to frame out the face by working in the hair around the face. And it's a nice, I added yellow to my brown, Windsor yellow. And after my application of fairly rich bodied wash, I cleaned my brush and went right to the water. I want to lighten up the color. It was a little bit too saturated. Saturated means the degree of pigment in the color in relationship to the water. I had a lot of paint and very little water. It was giving me a strong brown, as you see there. I wanted to tone that down a bit, so I washed my brush and went back into clean water. Now I'm picking up a little bit more of that brown. I want to get a little bit of this like curly bunch of hair in that area. You know, it might be, I hesitate to do this, but the way it looks, I'm going to add a little salt to that. It's a bit of an interesting texture going on there, and salt may be what it takes to bring it out. Also, I'm going to get the clump of hair there placed in. I should have wet it first. It doesn't really matter at this point. And it lightens up towards the edge, outer edge, so I'll just add some plain water there. Good. And why not finish with the hair over here? Her hair, the actual painting that I copied, that I use as my source, it's quite a bit of brownish in it, brown red in it. After I'm finished, I'm going to wash over the whole thing with a very thin veil of Windsor red. Good. Where the hair becomes tangent with her back, it's pretty strong shadow, so I'm going to mix it with Antwerp blue. I don't know if you brought that home in your palette. It's a nice blue, very effective for shadow development. When you mix it with brown matter, it gives you a neutral tint. Neutral tint would be okay in that area too. If you have that in your palette, use the neutral tint. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just drag a loaded brush down with that. I'm going to let it spread on its own. I could even take a little of this and add it here. Yeah, nice. See what's happening with the salt? Also, I see a little of that action in here, so salt may be a wise thing to apply here to give the hair an added texture. The brown, let me say something at this point though. I'm looking at the brown, it's a little too strong. I think the solution would be to introduce some of that strong brown up here. It'll balance out the image nicely. But here we go, some salt. Let's see what happens with that. I'll let it bleed. Then I'm going to drop down here and do the same thing. Notice I didn't wet it. I don't have to. It's such a tiny area. And I'll lay in this one over here too. The background needs to be darker. It'll help push out the face. So I'm going to take a little bit of this brown wash that I originally mixed, combination of the brown and the Antwerp blue, and I'm going to start to lay in a darker. But like I did with the body, I'm going to do it incrementally. I would actually like to move this around. I guess it really doesn't matter. There we go. It's just easier for me to get in there. Good. Actually, if I add a little bit of water right there, you get an interesting watercolor effect. It's called a back run. When water runs into a wash and it creates that kind of thing, it's referred to as a back run. To finish this up, I can continue to work in details and tones. For example, the face, the hair over here. It might be nice to add some additional browns to that to darken that area and enrich the textural quality of it. What I'm saying is painting into it will be a good thing. It'll help to homogenize, for example, the hair area into one massive hair rather than all these little sections. Yet the little sections that I created retain their distinctive quality and become effective detail. Of course, I could go on for hours like this, so I'm not going to do that. You could work as long as you want on it. What I would like to do is just add some little touches of detail to suggest eyebrow and the eye and the lips. I'll mix in a little bit of my yellow into the brown to get a lighter brown. There we go. Where will I put that? Right about there. Yeah. And then I'll use that brown for the eyebrow. The person who posed for this way back when in the 1400s had sort of reddish hair. Little indication of the eyelash there. Just trying to give you an idea how I play with it. I'm adding a little Windsor red into it right now. Take away that jaundiced look that it seems to have taken on. I could continue to develop this piece at this stage. There's plenty of things for me to do. I could continue to enrich the shadow areas. With subtle washes of complementary colors. I just added a little green, but what that will really do is enhance the realistic look of the brown. Even here, you get a little of that. Very subtle. I could play with it and go on and on and on. But I'm not going to do that. What I would like to do, though, is give it a bit of a border. I think that would be a nice graphic element to introduce. Yeah, that'll look good. It'll help frame out this interesting little portrait. I don't mind if the border is irregular. That noise you hear on my palettes, I have many of them. And I'm bouncing them all over the place, trying to get to my colors. There we go. See how I'm trying to keep the colors fairly subdued by flowing gray into it. Yeah, I like the way that's coming. Get a little bit more blue in there. A little more of this. Actually, it's color I don't have in class. I don't use it too often because it's very synthetic. It's called quinacridone gold. Okay. Texturize the border in a couple of areas. In another video, I'll complete the piece. I have some interesting ideas for the letters and the colors and the patterns and the cards, but for another time.